Mr. McKean for his 5 minutes question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here, especially you've got somebody that traveled all the way from Oklahoma to be here. I just want to reiterate after the break, just for the American people to know, it's important that we follow the rule of law. I love, commonly said now, to be the rule of law team. It requires discipline. It requires focus. It requires that, we don't turn ourselves into a banana republic. Article 2, Section 4 says the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. The Constitution absolutely gives authority to impeach and remove the president, vice president, and all civil officers for treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. This tool was inherited from English practice in which Parliament impeached and convicted ministers and favorites of the crown in a struggle to rein in abuse of power. That's the historical precedent on this. And let me back that up, okay? So it's been talked about this morning. Federalist 65 has some admonitions, has some warnings, and it says the subjects within the context of impeachment, in Federalist 65, written by Alexander Hamilton, it says the subjects of its jurisdiction, talking about impeachment, are those offenses in which proceed from the misconduct of public men, or in other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. It goes on to say that the model from which the instrument of impeachment, the idea of this institution has been borrowed, pointed out, that course to be the convention. In Great Britain, it is the province of the House of Commons to prefer the impeachment and the House of Lords to decide upon it. Two-part. Just like we've employed in our Constitution. Several of the state constitutions have followed this example, as well as the latter, as the former seem to have regarded the practice of impeachment as the bridle in the hands of the legislative body upon the executive servants of government. You know why I love that? I grew up in the performance horse industry, and I learned 3-stage stops from a father who trained cutting horses professionally. You sit down, they feel the pressure of that. Then you say, whoa. And then a well-trained, well-disciplined animal learns that when they feel the 3-stage stop coming, they're going to park it without having to lift the 4 ounces of the reins of the bridle. The problem is we've got men and women who serve in positions of authority, and the definition, according to AQHA, of a reining horse, I love this, is willfully guided, willfully controlled. The problem is when you have men and women in influence who aren't willfully guided and willfully controlled by the Constitution, and as stated by Alexander Hamilton, the job of the legislative body is to grab the reins and say, whoa. And we have an out of place, out of their floodplain, bureaucracy within Homeland Security that is doing what they want to, not following the rule of law. So, with that said, the question is before us. Are there instances of fact where Mayorkas has flippantly disregarded the laws enacted by Congress? Point 1, parole. Section 212D5A of the Immigration and Nationality Act says parole shall only be granted on a case-by-case basis, only for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit. Mayorkas has not done that. He's created broad parole programs for 30,000 aliens per month, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela without evidence of humanitarian reasons or without significant public benefit. Point 2, resources. In FY 2020, Congress explicitly appropriated funds for constructions of barrier systems, which our AG is talked about from Missouri. Part of your lawsuit was over this. Barrier systems along the southwest border. Mayorkas refused to comply with Congress's appropriation, refused to build barrier systems, as Congress said, as a will of the people, the power of the purse. Point 3, detention. Section 235B1 of the Immigration and Nationality Act outlines the procedures by which aliens attempting to enter the United States without a visa or proper immigration papers are to be detained and removed. Mayorkas has not done this. His agency has released several million illegal aliens who should have been detained and deported. Question. Mr. Bowman, you've been invited by the Democrats to provide your advice as a professor. And you said that the impeachment of Mayorkas needs to be based on not policy differences, but it has to be, quote, has to be subversion of the Constitution. Another quote from you, for illegal ends or serious offenses. Is that correct? Yes or no? That you said those statements. Has to be subversion of the Constitution for illegal ends or serious offenses. Yes or no?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? You're speaking rather.
You've said it, it's on record. I need to kind of watch my time and move on through this. To the attorney generals in the room, is not administering the laws of the land a serious offense for illegal ends, does it rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors? Please, each of you, please answer that question.
Absolutely, Congressman.
It does rise.
Unequivocally, yes.
We've got 3 attorney generals who say that the violation of these laws is a violation of the enforcement of the law and is grounds of high crimes and misdemeanors, which the Constitution clearly lays out is high crimes and misdemeanors is a reason for impeachment. What we tolerate, we empower. Congress has to do its job and send a strong signal. If you don't follow the law, you're going to be out. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you guys for showing up. You guys aren't exactly attorney generals of southern border states, are you? But even you guys are feeling the effects of what's coming across that southern border. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
Gentlemen, how long roughly did it take you to become attorney general? Go ahead, Mr. Knudsen.
Well, roughly how long? I mean, campaigned for the better part of a year.
No, entire career. Just like 20 years, 15 years, how long did it?
Roughly 15 years.
What about you, Mr. Drummond?
40.
Mr. Bailey?
Been practicing law for 10 years.
Yeah, so you guys just didn't wake up one day and say, I want to be attorney general, and snap, that happened, right? I noticed that some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been trying to diminish your qualifications. What's the primary responsibility of the federal government, Mr. Knudsen?
Primary responsibility of the federal government is to carry out and execute the laws of the Congress.
Yeah, is it to protect our unalienable God-given rights as well?
Absolutely.
What about, does our government have a responsibility to protect its citizens, Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Are any of you guys familiar with Article 4, Section 4 of our Constitution, often called the Invasion Clause? Anybody?
Yes.
I'm going to read it real quick. The United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion. Now, there's arguments right now about whether or not this is an invasion, but it's tough to argue when you have the equivalent of a combat division size of illegals coming across our southern border. For those of you that don't know, that's 10,000 individuals every single day in invasion. And we've talked about what comes with those individuals from crime, the economic burdens on our citizens, the families being destroyed of fentanyl. You guys are all familiar with that. You guys see them every single day in your own states. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Are you guys aware of the job title of Alejandro Mayorkas, Mr. Knudsen?
His specific job title is Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security.
Secretary of Homeland Security. Now, I'm no constitutional scholar, Mr. Drummond, but just from that job title alone, would you assess that maybe his job might be to secure and protect the homeland?
He has the duty to control and guard our homeland.
Mr. Bailey, is Secretary Mayorkas doing that?
He has abdicated his official legal responsibilities and his moral and ethical responsibilities to this nation.
Mr. Knudsen, is he doing that?
He absolutely is not. He is derelict in many of those duties.
One of my colleagues talked about the difference between individuals crossing on the terror watch list between the Biden administration, Secretary Mayorkas, and the former administration. Those numbers were a stark contrast. Under the last administration, 14 individuals on the terror watch list came through, were encountered at that southern border. Under this administration, and we still have several months to go in this new year, already 300 individuals on the terror watch list. Are you gentlemen aware of how many individuals it took to pull off 9/11?
Not 300.
Yep, it was about 19. Does it concern you guys, as folks that are concerned with the security of citizens in your state, that something like that might happen in the United States of America or your state?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
You guys talked about it all day long, and I find it interesting that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle kept saying that we're grandstanding here, or we're just campaigning, or these are political differences. But you guys, all three of you, and we went over how long it took you to get in your positions. You guys are like the highest law enforcement officials in your state. You guys all went over not just the policy differences, but the different laws that this secretary is in violation of. Mr. Knudsen, can you go over some of those really quick?
I absolutely can. I think the Secretary is clearly in violation of USC 8, Section 1225. He's clearly violated Section 1182 by granting mass parole. Immigration and Naturalization Act makes very clear that that is not to be granted on a mass basis. That's to be granted on a case-by-case, individual basis.
Yep, thank you, sir. Ms. Jackson and Mr. Bowman both said that betrayal of a nation is one of the criteria necessary for impeachment. If allowing the equivalent of an army division of illegals coming across the southern border on a daily basis, causing the deaths of hundreds of thousands due to fentanyl every single about 100,000 every year, enabling the sex trade in this country, along with the importation of thousands of MS-13 gang members, causing the encounters of individuals on the terror watch list to go from 14 under the last administration to 300 on this administration, lying to Congress about having operational control, costing the American taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars for housing and care for these illegals, and more than 24,000 people from the Republic of China coming across our southern border in this last year alone. If those aren't betrayal to a nation, I don't know what is. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes or for his closing arguments.
Thank you very much. And let me thank our witnesses for being here today. This hearing has confirmed what we already know over 4 hours ago. This so-called impeachment is nothing more than a thinly veiled political stunt. My Republican colleagues have failed to make a case for impeachment, failed to understand the Constitution, and failed to do anything to address challenges at the border. This hearing has been more Republican rehash, attempting to impeach the Secretary over policy differences instead of working with Democrats on immigration and border policy reform, demonstrates that Republicans are not only interested in using border security as a political talking point. This impeachment scheme is simply more distraction from a do-nothing Republican Congress. They talk about H.R. 2, a disastrous bill they wrote in secret without any opportunity for Democratic input, knowing very well that it was dead on arrival in the Senate. The so-called investigation that Chairman Green has launched has been conducted with a predetermined outcome from the start. And now, our Republican colleagues are trying to pretend that this effort isn't political. Mr. Chairman, the American people will see through such an incredibly obvious sham. No matter how many times my Republican colleagues twist the facts to suit their narrative, there's absolutely no evidence that Secretary Mayorkas has committed an impeachable offense. No amount of yelling, finger-pointing, false righteousness, indignation can change that fact. And we heard today from Professor Bowman, the consensus from constitutional scholars is clear. Republicans have not made a case for impeachment. Even Republicans' favorite constitutional scholar, Jonathan Turley, has come out against this impeachment, not just because it is baseless, but because it is what a dangerous precedent it would set. As Professor Turley explained, impeaching Secretary Mayorkas, quote, is a slippery slope that we would be wise to avoid. Indeed, it is precisely the temptation the framers thought that they had avoided by rejecting standards for maladministration. It's no accident that Democrats invited a legal scholar to this hearing, while Republicans invited 3 partisan politicians. The Republican witnesses have no expertise in impeachment. One of the witnesses is facing 41 ethics charges. Another witness, State Supreme Court unanimously found he failed to perform the plain, unequivocal, and ministerial duties of approving information for a ballot initiative. But again, no expertise on impeachment. All we learned today from the majority witnesses is that some Republican politicians don't like a Democratic cabinet secretary. Republicans are pretending to provide accountability, just like they pretended to legislate these past months. In his opening, the chairman said there was no reasonable alternative to pursuing impeachment. Let me suggest some alternatives. Republicans could have supported funding increases for border security operations instead of voting against them. Republicans could provide additional resources requested by CBP. They could engage with the administration on immigration. They have not. Republicans have failed to act at every turn. Instead of working with Democrats, they've wasted a year chasing a baseless impeachment to satisfy their most extreme right-wing members. But as what we've heard today, impeachment was never intended to be used that way. The Constitution's framers expressly did not include mismanagement, misgovernment, or maladministration as a basis for impeaching a cabinet secretary. My Republican colleagues may disagree with this administration's border policy, and that's their right. But to use impeachment to settle such differences is unconstitutional. Mr. Chairman, I understand the last year has been a tough one for Republicans and that your party would like to deflect attention elsewhere. This is the very kind of thing that the framers worked to avoid when establishing grounds for impeachment. 3 years ago, Mr. Chairman, you wrote, "Unity can be only achieved by focusing on where we find common ground instead of drawing new battle lines, and that every one of us has a role in bridging the divide." When Chairman Green is ready to listen to his own words, I want to be clear. Democrats will be here waiting to work on responsible and effective policies to strengthen our border security, using the levels of power that the Constitution actually gives Congress. But until then, we'll continue calling this sham impeachment for what it is, a political stunt. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Before I start my closing statement, I just want to make an observation. It's very interesting that we point out that Mr. Bishop can't talk political stuff about running for election, but all the testimony from the left have been about politics, about running for office, and about, so just find it fascinating. But anyway, I recognize myself for my closing statement. Today we've heard powerful testimonies from the attorneys general of 3 states who are dealing with the consequences of Secretary Mayorkas' border crisis. I want to thank you all for being here and for your testimony, and of course, I'll thank Mr. Bowman for being here as well. As our witnesses made it abundantly clear, every state is now a border state. And why are we here? We're here because Secretary Mayorkas' policies were exploited by the drug cartels and have done incredible damage to the United States. Those policies were in violation of the laws passed by this Congress. The Congress said the INA detain, parole's an exception based on extreme circumstances, not 85%, as the Secretary says, is now just being released into the country willy-nilly. It's a violation of law. And interestingly enough, so he's disregarded the Congress. He's also disregarded the judiciary branch. 4 court rulings said cease and desist because you're breaking the law. I'm sorry, I took the oath at age 17 to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The oath wasn't to the American people. It wasn't to defend the landmass or the flag. It was to defend the Constitution. This secretary took the same oath to defend the Constitution. Well, I'm sorry, but I think the Constitution of the United States says we write the laws and not him get to pick and choose whatever the heck he wants to when he, as the executive branch, gets to execute the laws. He is to execute the laws as written. That is the Constitution he took an oath to. 4 court orders, cease and desist because you're breaking the law, and he disregards the judiciary branch and continues his policy. In fact, he doubles down, creating more policies that do even more catch and release, which is why I think it's intentional. He's abusing his position to force his woke immigration policies on the United States of America, despite the fact that Congress is supposed to fix those immigration laws. On top of that, Back on script now. On top of that, Secretary Mayorkas knows full well the consequences of these policies, but instead, he's reversing course, he's doubling down. It's worse. He's been to the border. He's seen the numbers. He's seen the fentanyl seizures. He's met with the grieving families. He knows about the cartels. He knows about the human trafficking and the child exploitation, yet he doesn't change a thing. In fact, as I said, he admitted to the Border Patrol the other day in a closed meeting, 85% are being released. Despite the intentionality behind this open border, Secretary Mayorkas is attempting to skirt the consequences of his actions. He has continuously tried to deflect, blaming climate change, wars in Latin America, non-existent DHS budget cuts. Well, there have been no budget cuts. And what is the cost of Secretary Mayorkas' border crisis? Fentanyl poisoning is killing thousands of young people every year. We learned from Attorney General Bailey that a total of 43 Missouri children died from accidental. They didn't have a choice. We had a testimony over here if Americans would just stop using drugs. Those little babies didn't have a choice. That baby on a VRBO in Florida certainly didn't have a choice. She wasn't able to just say no. My heart breaks for this baby and her parents. Because of this border crisis, thousands of mothers won't get to see their kids graduate. Thousands of fathers won't be able to walk their daughters down the aisle at those weddings. As a parent myself, that breaks my heart. That's the human cost. And apparently I need to explain to my colleagues, while it is accurate that most of the fentanyl is seized at the CBP, intercepted at the official points of entry, this is because those facilities are equipped for that purpose. Yet, we also know that drugs are coming across between ports of entry. It simply isn't being caught. This is because Border Patrol agents are tied up processing people at the crossing sites. And it's not like we can put the entire border as an X-ray machine or a CT scanner. And while my Democrat colleagues may not believe me, I hope that they will believe those on the front lines. Border Patrol agents have told us that drugs coming between the ports of entry is a key driver of the rising fentanyl crisis. Why else has fentanyl gone on the street from 98 bucks a hit to 25 bucks a hit after this secretary came into office? It's because of the simple supply and demand of coming across the southern border. We've also heard that from federal officials that they believe they only apprehend roughly 5 to 10% of the fentanyl coming in. So that's from the border. They're only catching 5 to 10%. What really matters here isn't how much fentanyl is caught, but how much fentanyl is flooding the neighborhoods. We got 3 guys here from 3 states, just discredited by the ranking member, but they're here to testify what's happening in their states. And you know what? Some of us heard you. Some of us heard you. People are dying because of this. Because of Secretary Mayorkas' border crisis, cities and states nationwide struggle to pay first responders while health care and education systems falter. In fact, medical care for undocumented aliens will cost $7 billion this year. We also heard from Attorney General Drummond about the organized criminal operations and that some illegal aliens run once they arrive. He shared that in Oklahoma alone, the AG office prosecuted 50 complex, multi-jurisdictional criminal cases, most of them involving Mexican and Chinese drug cartels coming across the southern border. Make no mistake, these human trafficking and drug trafficking rings are sophisticated, and they've taken a foothold in the United States because of our open border. Finally, we can't negate the credible threat this open border poses to our national security. With emboldened Islamic terrorist groups and an increasingly aggressive Communist Chinese party, we have to wonder how many bad actors are in that 1.8 million known gotaways and how many are in the unknown gotaways. Well, we won't know until something tragic happens. When we embarked on this investigation almost a year ago, we knew there would be roadblocks and that it would be a formidable challenge. No matter how hard this process gets, Homeland Republicans will not back down. The American people deserve answers, accountability, and ultimately an end to the border crisis. Look, if you have a secretary, a cabinet secretary, who breaks the laws or refuses to obey the laws of Congress, refuses to adhere to the rulings of a judiciary, the cease and desist orders from a judge, I mean, that's lawlessness on his own part. If it were me, a Republican, I'd expect to be impeached. You can't have cabinet secretaries that just decide to do whatever the heck they want to do. The Committee on Homeland Security has made every effort to ensure that this investigation was thorough. We do not take this lightly. The Homeland Security Committee spent almost a year, countless hours. We held 10 hearings. We heard from 24 witnesses, released 5 reports totaling 300 pages. We conducted numerous transcribed interviews, border chiefs, multiple visits to the border to see for ourselves. I don't hold any personal animosity towards Secretary Mayorkas, but I sure as hell don't want to see him continue as Secretary of Homeland Security, not after the pain and turmoil and chaos his policies have inflicted on the American people. And when congressional oversight demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt that executive branches are neglecting their duty, overstepping their authority, ignoring laws passed by Congress, it is our duty to act to defend this institution, to defend the Constitution. Also, just to be clear, this is the responsibility of Congress. The Supreme Court made it clear in United States versus Texas, according to the court, and I quote, even though the federal courts lack Article III jurisdiction over the suit, other forums remain open for examining the executive branch's arrest policies. For example, Congress poses an array of tools to analyze and influence these policies. Those are political checks for a political process, end quote. So not only do these proceedings have the support of the House, the Supreme Court has pointed to impeachment as a source of relief for states suffering a border crisis put together, orchestrated by a secretary who is violating the laws passed by Congress and disregarding the court's orders. Now, before I end, I'd like to address a few things other things my Democrat colleagues have said. Let me start with saying I'm very disappointed in the ranking member for misquoting me. He claimed that I wrote that I will not support another dime to DHS. This is inaccurate. What I wrote was I will not support another dime to DHS until the policies of H.R. 2 are signed into law and enforced by the administration. And we're talking about the supplemental. So we're not talking about the budget, which has already gone through and passed the House. We're talking about additional dollars in a supplemental. So to suggest that I would defund the Department of Homeland Security is disingenuous at best. I can tell you there have been a lot of Democrats who've said defund ICE and defund the police. I never said defund Homeland Security. And I'd also like to address the claim that Secretary Mayorkas isn't at fault here, that he isn't to blame for the economic crisis in Latin America. I agree. But poverty in Latin America is nothing new. And actually, poverty rates in Latin America have stayed flat from last administration to this one. Further, I'd like to reiterate the Democrats sent these articles to impeachment to our committee in November. They sent it to this committee. The Homeland Security Committee has the authority of the House to conduct these impeachment proceedings, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Democrats can bring up a New York Times popcorn story all they want to. They keep talking about MAGA Republicans and former President Trump this and that. But it's clear these are deflections because they have no answers for the piss-poor performance of Secretary Mayorkas and his policies. And let me just point out, my Democrat colleagues are quick to talk about kids in cages under Trump, but did a single one of them mention the 85,000 missing UACs under President Biden? Of course not. The hypocrisy in this room is palpable. And of course, our guide should always be the intent of the framers of our Constitution, the Founding Fathers, regarding how Constitution was intended to be understood. But too often in political debates, people can fall into inconsistency for possibly partisan reasons. I get that. For example, Professor Bowman wrote a book on impeachment in 2019 called High Crimes and Misdemeanors, A History of Impeachment for the Age of Trump. In it, he states the power of the House to impeach cabinet secretaries, quote, remains important as a signal of legislative displeasure with administrative personnel and policy, end quote. Yet today, he's testified on multiple occasions that policy alone isn't enough for an impeachment. That's what Professor Bowman wrote when Donald Trump was president, but now, in his written testimony at page 3, he writes that impeachment, and I quote, should not be attempted based on simple policy disagreements between Congress and the executive branch, end quote. I guess that was then and this is now. But let me be clear, no one is supporting impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas over policy differences. The impeachable offenses relate to violations of the law. Insisting on enforcing the law as written by Congress is not a policy difference. It is a fundamental requirement of the Constitution. Lastly, I got to tell you, I was appalled from someone on the left who suggested this has all been a waste of time. We're here today because it is our duty to provide oversight and hold the executive branch accountable. And yes, this includes the option to impeach. We cannot allow a cabinet secretary to violate the laws, disregard the constitutional structure, lie to Congress under oath, all to massive harm to the Americans, and do nothing about it. And if a Republican were head of DHS and committing these same acts, I can assure you we wouldn't tolerate it from them either. It is the Homeland Security Committee's responsibility to provide oversight of DHS. This is what we were elected to do. This is what we were appointed to this committee for. Now, this might not be how you want to spend your time, but it certainly is how we must be spending our time. And I ask the members here today, in fighting to stop the needless death of children to fentanyl poisoning, a waste of time? Is it a waste of time to try to protect those kids? Is trying to stop criminal cartels from wreaking havoc on the country a waste of time? It's not. And the insinuation is appalling. What has been a waste of time, the amount of taxpayer dollars this border crisis has cost, the amount of people who have died as a result of fentanyl flowing across our southern border, the amount of migrants who've lost their lives making the dangerous journey, the amount of money state and local governments have had to spend cleaning up Secretary Mayorkas' mess. This is where the real waste has been, not these official proceedings. As we continue these proceedings in the coming days, it's important that the American people remember the facts and that this body once again embraces our constitutional responsibilities. When I took that oath as a young boy on the plane at West Point, it meant something to me then. And when I took it when the people of Tennessee sent me up here, it meant just as much, if not more. We will support the basic tenets of that document, and that is Congress writes the laws, the president executes those laws, the judiciary interprets those laws, and they have a responsibility to do their duty, and we do also. Without objection, that ends my closing statement, and without objection, the committee stands adjourned.